On this Wednesday night, landmark climate deal or litany of loopholes. The agreement at COP28 to transition away from fossil fuels.
How can it be done?
Israel's prime minister dismisses international pressure for a humanitarian ceasefire as heavy rain makes life more dire for people in Gaza. And Canada's support for a ceasefire ignites new political rifts in Ottawa. Road to recovery.
I really see it as a privilege.
Israelis still volunteering to help sick Palestinians get treatment in Israeli hospitals. And reinvigorating the heart of Manitoba's capital.
This project is literally economic reconciliation.
The unique game plan between the owner of an NHL team and 34 First Nations.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It didn't go as far as calling for a phase out of the use of fossil fuels, but the final agreement at the UN Climate Summit in Dubai is being hailed as historic, if only because the words fossil fuels are finally being mentioned.
We have language on fossil fuel in our final agreement for the first time ever.
Nearly 200 countries agreed to transition away from coal, natural gas and oil, the biggest producers of greenhouse gas emissions. Phasing out was a step too far for big oil exporters like Saudi Arabia, and this was a compromise. An important milestone is what climate activist and former U.S. Vice President Al Gore calls it, but it's also the bare minimum we need, he says, and is long overdue. He and others warn of the influence of countries whose economies depend on oil and gas. Production is on the rise, and it's not clear at all what the timeline is to transition away. Heather Yourex-West has our top story on the agreement and the reaction.
COP28 has ended with a deal, and Canada's Environment Minister says he's pleased. This outcome is monumental, Stephen Guilbeault said on social media. We've reached a global consensus to secure a clean energy transition away from fossil fuels.
That's a really big step forward for an international conference like this. So while the final wording may not have been quite as strong as Canada was advocating for that we would hope to see, it's still a big step forward.
What Canada and more than 100 other nations had wanted was a full fossil fuel phase-out. Instead, the deal calls for a transition that would get the world to net zero emissions by 2050.
So the industry has been working towards this for a long time. The real question becomes, how can it be done?
Canada's oil sand consortium, the Pathways Alliance, says it was pleased to see the deal recognize the role carbon capture and other technologies can play towards a future that can include more oil and gas. Whether we end up with 25 or 100 million barrels per day in 2050, there will still be significant demand, it said, and we should continue to meet that demand with Canadian oil.
This year, the highest number of fossil fuel lobbyists ever were at COP. Over 2,456 fossil fuel lobbyists came to essentially bring these negotiations off the rails and weaken the final outcome.
Climate scientists have argued that a future with even abated fossil fuels may not be enough to keep the Earth from warming beyond 1.5 degrees. But Alberta's Premier disagrees. I am greatly encouraged by the success in pushing back against the voices of those obsessed with accelerating the phase-out, Danielle Smith said. The deal to transition away from fossil fuels seen as a win for those pushing to keep the industry going for decades to come. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Israel's prime minister says nothing will stop his war against Hamas, including international pressure. Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to military commanders a day after at least 9 Israeli soldiers were killed in Gaza, one of the deadliest days for the Israeli military since their operation began. In Gaza, heavy rain and cold temperatures are adding to the despair, especially for those forced into makeshift camps. Most Gazans have been displaced from their homes. Tens of thousands of them are trying to survive in flimsy shelters near Rafah, as far south as they can go. And food, warm clothing, and supplies are increasingly hard to find. For 68 days, Gaza has been under siege, and every day the humanitarian crisis deepens. Crystal Goomansingh reports, and a warning, some of the images in her story are distressing.
It's a delivery received with open arms. The hospital resupply by UNICEF, however, took place under tense conditions.
We focus on maternal, newborn and child health. We know that there are many cases of injuries, but we also focus on the other areas of pregnant women.
The fighting will continue until victory, until Hamas is annihilated, says the Israeli Prime Minister. His words follow not only a wave of international pressure, but also one of the deadliest days for Israeli soldiers since the ground offensive began. On Tuesday, 10 Israeli soldiers were killed, including 9 from the Golani Brigade involved in an operation in northern Gaza. 2 senior commanders were killed that day. For those in Gaza, grief is clashing with the changing season. Heavy rain, wind, and falling temperatures are making life in displacement camps that much more intolerable. Beyond fetching clean water, buckets of sand are gathered to build up the ground around their homes, crafted out of blankets and scraps of plastic. As you can see, it was torn apart. We tried to fix it. It was torn and the water fell on us. We were drenched in rain. Before the rains hit, the United Nations described the situation on the ground as apocalyptic. For those trying to survive it all, the suffering is endless. I can't see a peaceful solution. I can't see one. I hope to God that there will be a peaceful solution. Hope in the face of grim reality. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Canada's decision to vote in favour of a UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the unconditional release of all the hostages is being both praised and condemned. Canada voted with the majority of countries at the UN, but there was no condemnation of Hamas in that resolution, and that doesn't sit well with everyone. David Akin is following reaction from Ottawa. David.
Well, Donna, this division within the government caucus existed before the UN vote. You remember some Liberal MPs, many of them Muslim or representing ridings with large Arabic populations, well, they had written an open letter to the Prime Minister asking for Canada to press for a full ceasefire. And those MPs, they were pleased this week to see that shift in the government's position.
I don't think this anti-Israeli, this is the benefit for the benefit on both sides, Israel and Palestinian.
As a mother, I cannot sleep at night. And as I think most of us as parents, I think we have to play a leadership role to make sure that we protect the innocent civilians.
We are alarmed at the diminishing safe space for civilians.
But the UN vote has now upset many other Liberals, those, for example, who are Jewish or have large Jewish populations in their riding. Montreal MP Anthony Housefather is one of those.
An unconditional ceasefire simply puts Israel as one who has international obligations as having to lay down arms, and Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that has no obligation to follow international rules, will just do what it did again, and I can't live with that.
So is Winnipeg MP Ben Carr.
I'm a Liberal, and it's okay for me to, at times, question or disagree or ponder the positions on certain issues that my party has taken.
I'm curious how you're reacting. Indeed, several Liberal MPs said the public airing of these disagreements is the way democracy should work and is a sign of strength.
We have a tradition between Muslim caucus members and Jewish caucus members. Every year we get together and have Christmas dinner. We have a wonderful relationship amongst our caucus.
I can tell you that the mood in caucus is very strong. Look, we are a diverse caucus. We represent the diversity in Canada.
Now, as for the Prime Minister, he reminded his caucus that Canada's call for a ceasefire also came with a call for Hamas to lay down its arms and for Hamas to release all hostages. Donna.
All right, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
People demanding a ceasefire shut down a freeway in downtown Los Angeles this morning. Protesters linked arms and blocked traffic for about an hour. 75 people were arrested. It was organized by a group called If Not Now, a group of American Jews who want elected officials to call for a lasting ceasefire and an end to U.S. support for Israel's war. The group has held a number of disruptive protests across the U.S. since October 7th. In Ukraine, a barrage of Russian missiles pounded Kyiv today, injuring at least 53 people. It is the second major assault on Ukraine's capital this week. The missiles severely damaged homes and a children's hospital. People streamed out onto the streets to assess the damage. Ukraine's president was in Oslo today, urging Nordic leaders to continue giving military and economic aid to his country. Global News has learned a second suspected senior Iranian official may be deported from Canada. No information about the man's alleged role in the regime has been released. The Immigration and Refugee Board is trying to determine if there are sufficient grounds for deportation under Canadian sanctions. Today, the Defense Minister, Bill Blair, said certain individuals involved with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are involved in terrorism.
When individuals have been involved in activity that would make them ineligible to be in this country, we'll do everything we can to keep them out, and when they do get into this country, we'll do everything we can to remove them.
You can read the full story about this on our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational. The Defense Minister also had an update on culture change within the Department of Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. Bill Blair says 17 of 48 recommendations made by former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour have now been completed. The government will also be abolishing the use of the term sexual misconduct and will more clearly define sexual assault.
We believe that by providing a clear definition of sexual assault in line with the criminal code, we will be better positioned to act when incidents occur and to respond in a more trauma-informed way.
Arbour's review examined how to eradicate sexual harassment and misconduct from the military. Reconciliation and revitalization coming up. How co-owners of an NHL team and dozens of First Nations hope to inject new life into Winnipeg's downtown core. Tesla is recalling more than 2 million vehicles in Canada and the U.S. to fix a defect in its autopilot system. It follows a 2-year investigation by U.S. safety regulators into a series of Tesla crashes that happened when the autopilot system was in use. Some of them were deadly. The recall covers more than 2 million vehicles sold in the U.S. and 193,000 sold in Canada. Models S, X, 3, and Y, manufactured since October 2012, are included. Transport Canada says Tesla will release an over-the-air software update to install new safeguards. Many cities are struggling to revitalize their downtown cores, and now Winnipeg is taking a unique approach. The company that owns the Winnipeg Jets is collaborating with 34 Southern Manitoba First Nations. They are teaming up to revitalize Winnipeg's core by developing nearly 2 million square feet of vacant real estate. That includes the beleaguered Portage Place Mall and the now empty Hudson's Bay building, both not far from the Canada Life Centre where the Jets play. As Melissa Ridgen explains, the plans involve both economic and social development.
We want to create a vibrant, dynamic downtown that leads to economic growth and improves quality of life of our people.
Grand Chief Jerry Daniels shares a common goal with a couple of very rich businessmen, Toronto billionaire David Thompson and his business partner, Mark Chipman, co-owners of the Winnipeg Jets. The Southern Chiefs organization is looking to turn this vacant Hudson's Bay building into affordable housing with green space and health services, while Chipman and Thompson want to turn this mostly empty mall into housing with office space and community and health supports. So why not coordinate?
SCO's plans for the Bay and our plans for Portage Place will be far more impactful if done in collaboration, where we both actively seek out what is good for one another.
It's a natural collaboration. The building's already joined by a walkway, and outside both, the grim toll mental health, addictions, and homelessness is taking. The new hub will include much-needed community and health supports.
We now see it as a social redevelopment plan first, a real estate development second.
It also represents what can happen when the requisite level of trust and a desire for the common good is shared between organizations.
This project is literally economic reconciliation.
The revitalization plan with support from all 3 levels of government is set to start next year with a 2027 target for completion. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
Calling out bad behaviour still ahead, the push for anti-racism policies in Newfoundland and Labrador's school system. A doctor in Newfoundland is calling out racism in the small community where he serves hundreds of patients. He says he reached a breaking point when his daughter was attacked. As Heidi Petrachik explains, a video he posted online went viral, sparking calls for action and a change of heart.
This is only racism and discrimination.
Dr. Gurgis Abarak wrote the online post after he says his teenage daughter was attacked at school.
She was crying and have some superficial injuries in her face.
The same day he received this text from an unknown number threatening harm and calling him, quote, Mr. Black. Police charged a youth with assault in connection with the incident at the school, an escalation of what he describes as the racist bullying his daughter has endured in the small Newfoundland town of Lewisport since they moved there 2 years ago. The alleged assault is the point at which he and his wife, both local physicians, thought of packing up and leaving.
I tried to know what is the reaction of the public. Is the public have the same point of view that we are black, we are immigrant, we are not supposed to be here?
Like so many rural communities, Lewisport desperately needs its local doctors. His post brought forth a flood of support, a call from the Premier, and a statement by the Mayor denouncing, quote, all forms of racism, stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination.
We do have to recognize that the incident did take place, and we certainly don't support that. We support all families who might be encountering these pieces or that are struggling right now.
Anti-racism activists in the province say this isn't an isolated incident. Some are pushing for changes in the school system for better prevention and intervention.
And if we don't deal with this, people are going to say, well, we have better support in other communities. We are going to leave.
Is the school board in Newfoundland are able to protect our kids?
The school board says it does strive to ensure schools are safe. In his latest video post, Dr. Embark says he's decided to stay in the end to ensure the board does what's needed to make sure all families are supported. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
So nice of you to greet us, Madeline. I thought surely you'd still be crushed under that house in Munchkinland.
Sticks and stones, Raymond.
Describing your breakfast?
That's actor Andre Brower, known as Captain Raymond Holt in the TV comedy Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He has died after a brief illness. He won 2 Emmy Awards. He's being remembered as a versatile actor. He played a detective in Homicide: Life on the Street and the leader of a heist crew in Thief. Brower was 61 years old. Next, the Israeli volunteers helping save the lives of Palestinians. Before Israel's war on Hamas, Palestinians who needed advanced medical treatment often traveled to Israeli hospitals for treatment. To help with the complicated journey, a charity called Road to Recovery connects Israeli volunteers with Palestinians who need transportation. Canadian Vivian Silver, who was killed in the October 7th attacks, was one of those drivers. The charity can no longer operate in Gaza, but volunteers are still helping Palestinians in the West Bank. Danielle Hamamjan talked to some of them about what drives them to keep going.
Mahmoud Saida is just 1.5 years, but he knows this routine quite well. His rare genetic disorder requires a long trip to the hospital every few weeks. And almost every time, there's a different driver at the wheel, but always an Israeli.
I think I drove with you 2 weeks ago. Maybe 3.
They've asked us not to show their faces. The Saida family is from the West Bank and is only allowed into Israel because of Mahmoud's medical appointments. His Palestinian parents cannot drive here, and so they rely on volunteers like Matityahu Sperber, who tries his best to make it a comfortable trip.
It's a Palestinian music playlist on Spotify.
But you like the Arab music?
Okay, well, I've been listening to this playlist for a long time now, and I actually like a lot of the songs.
He's part of a charity called Road to Recovery.
I have to say that I really see it as a privilege.
He's one of about 1,000 volunteers who shuttle sick Palestinians, mostly children, to Israeli hospitals from the occupied West Bank and prior to October 7th from Gaza.
You know, it's like my mission. You cannot go against your mission.
Yael Noy is head of the charity. She's proud of her work, but she's also now very cautious.
In Israel now, the main thing to say is everyone in Gaza is Hamas, and we should not help anyone there. And today I feel even sometimes it's a bit dangerous for me talking about what I'm doing.
Israeli-Canadian peace activist Vivian Silver was also one of the volunteer drivers, but was killed on the day of the attack.
Most of all of the
donations to the charity have poured in from all over the world. But in Israel, these are the kinds of threats Yael now hears.
Vivian Silver, we heard about your volunteer. They were glad what happened to her, and they wish us that maybe we will go to Gaza and they rape us and they cut us, and I really don't want to talk about it.
Those are fellow
terrible.
Israelis telling you that.
Yeah.
Back on the road to the West Bank, nothing will deter Sperber, who grew up in the U.S.
Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who would talk about how when he was on the march for civil rights from Selma to Montgomery in, I think it was 1965, how he felt like he was praying with his feet. And I always enjoyed that image. And I feel that now. I feel that when I'm driving these people and providing the service for them, that I'm praying with my wheels.
No lineups at the checkpoint going into Palestinian territory. It's coming out that's usually the problem.
Okay.
The day ends with smiles and a handshake, a rare sight these days. Danielle Hamamdin, Global News, at the Hasmonean checkpoint in the West Bank.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the CPKC holiday train that's making its way through Calgary, raising money for the food bank along the way. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.